All right, good morning, you guys. I want to, first of all, just let you know that we are going to be talking about safety today. And this is probably the 10th, maybe even the 15th time I've actually tried recording this. So hopefully this will be a success. Anyway, the reason why we're doing this is because we have a real desire to try a flipped classroom approach. We won't do this for everything, but there may be times when you have homework where your sole responsibility is really just to watch the PowerPoint and take some notes. So again, like I said, we're going to be talking about safety. First of all, if you look at this girl, let's say she's going into the lab room, there's a couple things wrong with her. Obviously, she's not wearing any clothes, a huge problem. Specifically for the lab, we want to make sure you're properly clothed. If she did have hands, we'd certainly want gloves on those hands and closed-toed shoes on her feet. For her eyes, we need some goggles, and definitely her hair needs to be tied back. So if we look at my lovely stick figure now, she is ready for the lab room, ready to go. So hopefully by now you've already read through the safety contract. Some of you have already brought it signed and back to me, but let's review some very important things. First of all, you need to always wear your goggles. This is an important part of dress code. We want to make sure that your eyes are protected, and you also shouldn't be touching your eyes throughout the lab. If you do wear contact lenses, just let me know. There's some labs that have very strong aromas. While we keep things well ventilated, it could still cause some eye irritation. So just let me know. If we are working with things that can stain your clothing, or maybe a strong acid or something that could burn, we'll certainly want you to wear an apron or a lab coat. This isn't very common though. Tie your hair back, young ladies, and I don't want to exclude you gentlemen, so make sure your hair is tied back. We certainly don't want any hair on fire. Not only does it stink, but we do like to keep our hair. Also, remove any loose clothing and jewelry. This is also a safety hazard, especially when we're working with fire. This could easily go across a flame and then you could catch fire. While I know you know stop, drop, and roll, we don't really want to be doing that in the lab room. If you do catch fire though, we do have a fire blanket, and I'll point that out to you in the lab room. Never wear open-toed shoes. In fact, you wouldn't be allowed into the lab room if you're wearing open-toed shoes. You must be wearing closed-toed shoes to actually conduct the lab. Some general precautions. There's a reason why we make you do a pre-lab. You need to read all directions, and the purpose of the pre-lab is that you're reading the directions and then you're putting it into your own words and writing it down in your lab notebook. If you don't have your pre-lab done before the lab, you will not be doing the lab, and you'll get a 0 on the pre-lab. Also, never perform labs alone. If you happen to be absent or you miss a lab, just come talk to me. We'll have to schedule time for you to do that. You can't be conducting it on your own or with another peer. You need to have adult supervision while you're doing that. Never perform labs that are not authorized by a teacher. What I mean here is that you shouldn't be mixing chemicals that you're not instructed to do so, or trying new things in the lab room. Only do something if you've been instructed to. Never eat or drink in the lab area. This includes chewing gum. You could certainly get contamination with these things, and I'd like to keep you around. Also, keep your work areas clean. This is a huge issue. A lot of times when the lab benches are dirty, we have a lot of things on top of them. This just becomes a hazard. Things can easily be knocked over, catch on fire. This also includes like bags, book bags, purses. If you have one of those, you want to bring it to the lab room. It needs to go under the lab bench, or it needs to be left outside the lab room. And then no horseplay. If you're roughhousing, if you're not listening, not paying attention, I have no problem with sending you out of the lab room. You'll get a detention, and you'll also get a 0 on your lab, and then we'll really look at your behavior before you conduct another lab in the future. First aid, always report an accident to me. Whether you spill something, break something, you accidentally get cut or burnt, always make sure that I'm aware of it, because there's certain protocols we need to take when something happens. Also be aware of the location of the first aid kit and other first aid materials. The first aid kit is right near the fire blanket in the lab room. We don't have a wash station if you get something in your eyes, and we don't have a shower, but we do have a sink, which you can always use if something like that were to happen. We also have DSMS sheets. This allows me, if we're working with chemicals, I'm able to look at what type of chemical we're working with and how to appropriately or properly treat when you get an acid on your hand, or maybe you mix something and we need to dilute it. So just let me know. let's talk about heating and fire safety. First of all, you need to always use goggles. Again, we want to protect your eyes. Keep combustible materials away from flames. This is anything that could catch on fire. Never heat anything unless you're told to do so. We don't want to have an adverse reaction, chemical reaction. Never reach across a flame. This is something that I always get very concerned about, because students sometimes you're working around the lab room, you're grabbing materials, and you forget that you have your Bunsen burner going. Make sure that you're not reaching across it. If you are done with your Bunsen burner, turn it off, and then there's no risk. When using a test tube and you're heating up a substance in a test tube, first of all, you should be using a test tube clamp, but always point the open end of the test tube away from yourself and away from people. When there's an odor or aroma given off of that, we certainly don't want that put in the direction of anybody. And also make sure you're not holding the test tube directly over the flame. Move it back and forth, because that could cause broken glass. And then never heat a liquid in a closed container. If you heat a liquid in a closed container, let's say you have a stopper on it or something, this could cause the glass to shatter and break. Sometimes we'll be using insulated gloves. These are called Keflex. This sort of, the glove looks like the Hamburger Helper glove to me. So if you know what the Hamburger Helper looks like, that's kind of what this glove looks like. Last thing here, if you do get burned, hopefully this wouldn't happen, but if you do, we would certainly run your hand or whatever you burned under cold water for about 10 to 15, maybe 20 minutes. This actually reduces swelling by conducting heat away from the skin, and then we would loosely wrap gauze around the burn to prevent infection. Heating substances, again, just some visual reminders. Never leave your Bunsen burner unattended. Turn it off when you're done. There's more. Oops, I don't know what just happened there. Never point the test tube towards you when you're heating. Okay. And then let's talk about the fire triangle. Triangle obviously has 3 sides. If you look here, we have 3 sides, which make up oxygen, heat, and fuel. If we have no oxygen, you're not going to have combustion. Something's not going to light on fire, so we would have no fire. If you don't have a source of heat, so energy transfer, again, we wouldn't have a fire. And then if we removed fuel from the fire, if you remove the fuel, you decrease heat, and that actually stops a fire from burning. Let's talk about these a little more in detail. Fuel is any combustible material, and it can be in any state of matter, so solid, liquid, gas. Most solids and liquids, though, become a vapor or gas before they actually start to burn. Some examples can include clothing, furniture, curtains, flammable liquids. Obviously, we won't see all of these in the lab room, but if you remove the source of fuel for a fire, okay, you'll be able to stop that. Think about the forest fires going on in California. If you didn't have the fuel supply, so all those trees and everything that's down on the ground, if we remove that, you obviously would be able to stop the fire. Secondly, if we got rid of oxygen, the air we breathe is about 21% oxygen, and fire requires at least 16% oxygen. If we decrease the amount of oxygen available to the fire, you will stop the fire. You can think of like a candle. When you light a candle and you put a top on it, you'll see that the flame actually dies out. And the reason why is because you're decreasing the oxygen and you increase the levels of carbon dioxide. Lastly, heat, which is energy needed to increase the temperature of the fuel to a point where vapors are actually given off for ignition to occur. Heat sources can be anything from stoves, heating appliances, fireplaces, damaged wiring. If you think about the lab room, it could be a hot plate or a Bunsen burner. If you unplug that, you're certainly going to get rid of the fire. We have a couple more things to talk about. Let's talk briefly about chemical safety. First of all, never mix chemicals unless you're told to do so. Okay, again, this goes back to instructions. Never put your face near the mouth of a container holding a chemical. Again, the fumes that are given off from that could be hazardous. Dispose the chemicals as instructed. You will not be dumping chemicals down the sink. Okay, a couple of reasons why. Those chemicals could react with water in the sink, and that water is going back into our tap water. We're going to be drinking that eventually, and I don't think I want to be drinking that. So I'll have a certain place for you to actually dispose of used chemicals. Never inhale fumes. So when we're working with chemicals and I ask you to smell the odor, you're going to do what we call a waft. You're going to wave the fumes towards your nose, not directly sniff. And that allows you to actually get a sense of what the odor smells like. Always pour water first when adding an acid, okay? The reason why, when you mix water and an acid, you have a chemical reaction. This can boil and it can spit up, and you can actually get a nasty burn from it. So water is actually less dense than an acid. So if you add acid to water, it actually sinks, so that you'll have less of the spitting and the burning. So be very careful of that. I'll remind you when we work with acids. Also, wash spills right away. If you get something on yourself or in your eyes, we need to flush that with cold water for about 20 minutes. Rinse off your hands for about a good 20 minutes. We can also apply a weak base if you do spill an acid. That will buffer it, neutralize it. A couple visual reminders. Remember, don't handle, smell, or taste the chemicals. Don't dump the chemicals down the sink. Also, if we are done with chemicals, make sure you don't dump the unused chemicals back into the original container. This can cause cross-contamination. Glass safety is our last thing we're going to focus on. Never force tubing or a thermometer in a rubber stopper. This could actually break the glass, and we don't want broken glass that can easily get into your fingers and your hand. Never use broken or chipped glassware. If you happen to break something in the lab, it's okay. Don't touch it. Just call me over. I'll take care of it. There's a proper way to handle it and a proper way to dispose of it. So please don't handle it. Never eat or drink from the glassware. Thoroughly clean the glassware before putting it away. And then, again, like I said, please let me clean up the broken glass. It puts you at less risk. The type of glassware also that we use is called Pyrex or Chemex. And the reason why we use this glassware is that it resists thermal shock. Unlike some glassware you might have at home, when you change a temperature rapidly, you could easily break the glass. In fact, some of your moms probably use Pyrex, and you can use that for cooking and baking. End of lab rules. Please turn off all burners and hot plates, unplug all electrical equipment, clean up your work area. If you want to spend more time with me, you can certainly decide to leave your area a mess, and then you can serve a detention with me after school and help me clean up the entire lab room. So again, if you don't want to spend extra time with me, please clean up your area. And then always wash your hands. Even if we're not working with chemicals, it's always a good practice to wash your hands. You never know what's on the lab bench from what experiment was being done before you. So always wash your hands. If you guys have any questions, please let me know.